The hallway was supposed to be empty. Officer Thomas Brennan had walked this corridor 1,000 times. The polished marble floors, the ancient portraits staring down from gilded frames, the silence that hung thick like velvet curtains. But tonight, something was different. His boots made no sound as he approached the West Wing. Standard patrol. Nothing unusual. At least that's what he thought until he heard the voices. Sharp, cutting, unmistakable. Thomas froze. His hand instinctively moved to his radio, then stopped. These voices, he recognized them. Everyone in the palace would, Princess Anne and Queen Camilla. They weren't supposed to be here. Not at this hour. Not in this private section where staff rarely ventured and cameras didn't reach. Before you hear what happened next, hit that subscribe button. Because this story, what Thomas witnessed that night, has never been told before, and you won't believe where it leads. Thomas pressed himself against the corner wall. His training told him to announce his presence. Protocol demanded it. But something in the tone of those voices made him hesitate. This wasn't a casual conversation. The Queen Consort's voice rose first. Measured but firm. The kind of tone that carried authority even through stone walls. You've made your feelings quite clear, Anne, but this isn't about feelings anymore. Then came Princess Anne's reply, colder than Thomas had ever heard. No, it's about respect. Something you seem to have forgotten. Thomas felt his pulse quicken. He'd served the royal family for 8 years. Seen ceremonies, celebrations, even quiet family moments. But never this. Never raw conflict echoing through empty hallways where no one was supposed to hear. He knew he should leave. Turn around? Pretend he'd never been there, but his feet wouldn't move. The marble felt cold through his uniform. The portrait seemed to watch him with disapproving eyes. Outside, rain began tapping against the tall windows, adding to the tension that thickened the air. Respect? Camilla's voice carried a bitter edge now. I've spent years earning my place here. Years of scrutiny, criticism, comparison. And still, you look at me like I'm an outsider. Pause. Heavy and deliberate. Because you are. Those 3 words landed like stones in water. Thomas could almost feel the ripples of shock spreading through the silence that followed. He'd read the tabloids, of course. Everyone had. Rumors of tension within the palace walls. Speculation about family divisions. But rumors were just stories. Gossip from magazines and morning talk shows. This was real. This was happening right now, just meters away from where he stood. Camilla's heels clicked against the marble. She was pacing. Thomas could picture it, the measured steps, the controlled fury barely contained beneath royal composure. Your mother accepted me, Camilla said, her voice shaking slightly. Charles chose me. At what point do I stop being the villain in your story? When you stop rewriting ours. Anne's response was immediate. Precise. Like a blade finding its mark. Thomas pressed harder against the wall. His heart hammered so loud he was certain they would hear it. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was something deeper. Something that had been building for years beneath. The surface of formal dinners and public appearances. The rain grew heavier. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance. I never tried to replace her, Camilla said quietly. I never could. Then why are you trying to erase her? The question hung in the air like smoke. Thomas barely breathed. What were they talking about? Who were they talking about? His mind raced through possibilities. But before he could piece it together, he heard footsteps. Someone else was coming down the corridor, from the opposite direction. Thomas's stomach dropped. He was trapped. If he moved now, they'd see him. They'd know he'd been listening. But if he stayed, the footsteps grew louder, closer, and the voices in the hallway suddenly went silent. Someone had heard the approaching footsteps too. Thomas held his breath and waited. Whatever was about to happen next, he knew one thing for certain. This night would change everything. Asterisk. The footsteps belonged to Lady Margaret. Ashworth Thomas recognized her immediately as she rounded the corner, the Queen Consort's private secretary. A woman known for her discretion and her ability to appear exactly when needed, or exactly when summoned. She stopped at the entrance to the corridor. Her eyes swept the space, landing briefly on Thomas's position before moving to where the two royal women stood. "Your Majesty," Lady Margaret said, addressing Camilla with a slight bow. "Your Royal Highness. I apologize for the interruption." Thomas watched as both women composed themselves instantly. It was remarkable, really. Like watching masks slide into place. The anger, the hurt. The years of buried resentment, all of it disappeared behind polished royal facades in the space of a heartbeat. "No interruption, Margaret," Camilla said smoothly. Her voice was steady now, controlled, as if the previous conversation had never happened. "The princess and I were just discussing tomorrow's engagement." Anne said nothing. She simply looked at Camilla with eyes that could have frozen fire. Lady Margaret wasn't fooled. Thomas could see it in the way her shoulders tensed, the slight tightening around her mouth. She'd worked in the palace long enough to recognize the aftermath of conflict. "Of course," Margaret replied carefully. "Ma'am, your presence is requested in the king's study. He's waiting." Camilla's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For just a moment, her composure cracked. She glanced at Anne, then back to Margaret. "Tell him I'll be there shortly." He emphasized that it was urgent, Your Majesty. The words landed with weight. Charles was waiting, and from the look on Margaret's face, he wasn't happy about being kept waiting. Camilla straightened her shoulders, drew in a breath. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of her title. 5 minutes. Margaret hesitated, then nodded. "I'll inform His Majesty." She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into silence. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed. 10-30. Thomas remained frozen against the wall. He should have used the distraction to slip away, but now it was too late. If he moved, they'd know he'd been there the entire time. Anne broke the silence first. "He sent her to retrieve you." "Like a wayward child." "Don't," Camilla warned. "The truth hurts, doesn't it?" "The truth." Camilla took a step closer to Anne. Her voice dropped lower, but the anger beneath it burned hotter. "The truth is that you've never given me a chance. Not once in all these years, and didn't back away." "You want to talk about chances?" "About years? I want to talk about moving forward. About letting go of her memory." The word hung between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Camilla closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, Thomas saw something he never expected to see in the queen consort's face. Weariness, deep and profound. "That's not what I meant," Camilla said quietly. "Diana will always be, don't say her name." Anne's voice cut through the air like a whip. Sharp. Final Thomas felt the temperature in the corridor drop. So that's what this was about. Princess Diana. Even after all these years, her presence still echoed through these halls. Still cast shadows over the living, and Camilla began, but the princess held up her hand. "You wear her titles? You stand where she stood. You receive the honors that should have been hers. And now," Anne's voice cracked slightly, revealing the emotion beneath the anger. "Now, you want to change her memorial garden? Replace her roses with your preferred flowers. Rewrite the plaque. Minimize her charity patronages in the official records." "That's not I saw the proposal." Margaret accidentally sent it to the wrong email chain. "I saw every word." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas's mind reeled. A memorial garden. Princess Diana's legacy. He remembered when it had been dedicated years ago. The public mourning that followed. The Princess Royal had been there, stone-faced but present, honoring her late sister Dash and Dash Law, and now someone wanted to change it. Camilla's face had gone pale. That proposal was preliminary, a discussion draft. Nothing was decided. Nothing was mentioned to the family, Anne finished coldly. You were going to do it quietly, gradually, make changes here and there until one day. People wake up and her memory has been... What? Streamlined? Updated? Erased? You think I want to erase Diana? Camilla's voice rose despite her attempts to control it. After everything I've endured, every comparison, every cruel headline, every person who looks at me and sees only what I replaced, you didn't replace her. You could never replace her, I know that. Camilla's composure finally shattered. God, Anne, don't you think I know that? I wake up every day in that knowledge. I see it in your eyes, in William's careful distance, in the way the public still judges me decades later. Anne stood rigid, unmoved. Then why? She asked simply. Why touch anything connected to her memory? Camilla looked away, out the window where rain streaked down the glass like tears. Because I'm trying to breathe, she whispered. I'm trying to find space in a palace full of ghosts. Thomas felt the weight of those words, the raw honesty. For just a moment, he saw not a queen, but a woman trapped in an impossible situation, living in the shadow of a ghost she could never escape. But Anne's expression didn't soften. Then you chose the wrong palace, she said quietly, and the wrong family. She turned to leave. Her footsteps echoed on the marble. Wait. But the princess didn't stop, didn't look back. She walked away, leaving Camilla standing alone in the corridor. Thomas watched the queen consort's shoulders drop, watched her press her fingers to her temples, watched her take a shaking breath and straighten her spine once more. Then she, too, walked away, toward the king's study, toward whatever conversation awaited her there, and Thomas was left in the shadows, knowing he'd witnessed something no guard should ever see, the very real, very human cracks in the royal family's carefully constructed facade. But what Thomas didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that this confrontation was only the beginning, because someone else had been listening to. Asterisk. Thomas waited a full 5 minutes before moving. His legs were stiff from standing so still. His heart still pounded in his chest. As he finally stepped away from the wall, he glanced down the corridor one more time. Empty. He needed to finish his patrol. Needed to act normal. Needed to pretend the last 20 minutes had never happened. But as he turned toward the east stairwell, a voice stopped him cold. Quite a performance, wasn't it? Thomas spun around. His hand went to his radio instinctively. A figure emerged from a doorway he hadn't even noticed. A small service entrance, barely visible in the shadows. The kind of door staff used to move through the palace unseen. It was James Hartley, another guard. But not just any guard. James was senior staff. 10 years more experience than Thomas, known for being ambitious, for paying attention to things others missed, for having connections that extended beyond the palace walls, and from the look on his face, he'd heard everything. James Thomas said carefully, keeping his voice neutral. I didn't realize anyone else was on this floor. Clearly. James stepped fully into the corridor. He was smiling, but it wasn't friendly. I was checking the service passages. Standard security sweep? But then I heard voices. Interesting voices. Thomas's stomach turned to ice. I was just listening. Yeah, I saw. James walked closer, his footsteps deliberate. The question is, what are you going to do about what you heard? Nothing, Thomas said immediately. It's not our business. We're here to protect the family. Not what? Witness their secrets. James laughed quietly. Thomas, you're young, still idealistic, but let me explain something about how the world works. He glanced toward where the two women had argued, then back to Thomas. Information is currency, especially information like this. Thomas felt his blood run cold. You can't be serious. Why not? James shrugged. We heard a queen and a princess having a private argument about memorial gardens and family tensions. About Princess Diana's legacy being, what was it? Streamlined? Erased? Stop, Thomas said firmly. Whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking that there are people who would pay very well for this story. Journalists, publishers, people who make their living on royal scandals. James's eyes glinted in the dim light. We're palace guards, Thomas. We make decent money, sure, but we're not rich. We'll never be rich. We took an oath, Thomas said, his voice hard. Discretion, loyalty, service. Beautiful words. James nodded mockingly. But they don't pay for my daughter's university fees. They don't help with my mother's medical bills. They don't. They mean something, Thomas interrupted. Or they should. James studied him for a long moment. The rain continued outside. Thunder rumbled closer now. You're going to be a problem, James said finally. Aren't you? I'm not going to be anything. Because nothing happened tonight. We heard nothing. We saw nothing, except we did. James took another step closer. And here's the thing about secrets, Thomas. They don't stay buried. Especially not secrets this big. Someone will talk eventually. Someone always does. And let it be them, Thomas said. Not us. James laughed. A cold, brittle sound. So noble. So loyal. Tell me, Thomas, when you're still walking these corridors in 30 years, watching other people get promoted, watching your salary barely keep up with inflation, watching the royals live in luxury while you struggle, will you still feel so noble then? Thomas didn't answer. He couldn't, because part of him, a small, traitorous part, understood what James was saying. He'd thought the same things himself during long night shifts, during holidays spent at the palace while his family gathered without him, during moments when the gap between his world and theirs felt impossibly wide, but understanding wasn't agreeing. I joined this service for a reason, Thomas said quietly, because I believe in something bigger than myself. If you've forgotten that, maybe you're in the wrong job. James's expression darkened. Careful, Thomas. You're not making any friends right now. I'm not trying to. For a moment, they stood facing each other. Two men in identical uniforms, representing two very different choices. Then James's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression changed. Became thoughtful. Almost calculating. Interesting, he murmured, reading something on the screen. What? James looked up at Thomas. Do you know why Princess Anne was really here tonight? Why she and Camilla happened to be in this specific corridor at this specific time? Thomas shook his head. Tomorrow morning, James said slowly, there's a private family meeting about the future of several royal foundations and memorial projects, including, you guessed it, Princess Diana's memorial garden. Anne found out about the meeting by accident. Margaret's email mistake. That wasn't the real accident. The real accident was that it discovered the meeting was happening at all. Thomas felt pieces clicking into place. She confronted Camilla before the official meeting. More than that, she wanted Camilla to know that she knew, that she wouldn't go quietly, that this wasn't going to be a simple rubber stamp approval. James pocketed his phone. What we witnessed wasn't just an argument, Thomas. It was a declaration of war. The weight of those words settled over them. Tomorrow's meeting is going to be explosive, James continued. Family members choosing sides, public statements, maybe even formal splits within the royal household. And all of it leads back to what was said in this corridor tonight. All the more reason to keep quiet, Thomas insisted. Or all the more reason to get ahead of the story. James's smile returned. Think about it, Thomas. This is going to come out anyway. Within days, maybe hours, palace insiders will leak. Family members will make strategic statements. The press will have their version of events. He paused, letting the words sink in. Wouldn't you rather the truth was told? By someone who actually heard it? Rather than letting it be twisted and manipulated? Thomas wanted to argue. Wanted to tell James he was rationalizing something wrong into something right. But the logic was seductive. If the story would break anyway, if the conflict would become public regardless, didn't someone need to tell what really happened? No, Thomas said aloud, as much to himself as to James. We don't get to make that choice, James sighed. Then you're a fool. But a principled fool, I suppose. He turned to leave, then stopped. Just so you know, I'm not the only one who heard. The door I came through. It connects to the staff quarters. And tonight, there were at least 3 people passing through. Thomas felt his heart sink. Who does it matter? The point is, the secret. It's already out, Thomas. Already spreading through the palace like wildfire. By tomorrow morning, every staff member will know what was said. By tomorrow afternoon, The tabloids will have their anonymous sources. He looked back at Thomas with something almost like pity. You can be noble all you want, but you can't stop what's already started. Then James walked away, disappearing down the corridor, his footsteps fading, leaving Thomas alone with the horrible realization that everything was about to change, not just for the royal family, but for everyone who'd heard what they shouldn't have heard. And tomorrow morning, when that family meeting began, the explosion James predicted, it would tear through the palace like a storm. Thomas just hoped he'd be far away when it hit. But luck, as he was about to learn, wasn't on his side. Thomas didn't sleep that night. He lay in his small staff quarters room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word he'd heard. Every expression, every moment of anger and hurt that had passed between two members of the royal family. At 4:30 in the morning, his phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor, Captain Reynolds. 3 words. My office. 7 a.m. Thomas's stomach dropped. They knew someone had reported it. Or James had already made his move. He spent the next 2 hours in a fog of anxiety, showering, dressing, trying to prepare for whatever was coming. When he finally knocked on Reynolds' door at exactly 7 o'clock, his hands were shaking. Come in. Captain Reynolds sat behind his desk, his face unreadable. He was a career military man before joining the Royal Protection Service. Fair, but strict. And right now, he looked tired. Sit down, Brennan. Thomas sat. Reynolds studied him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to be honest with me. Completely honest. Understood? Yes, sir. Were you in the West Wing corridor last night around 10:30? Thomas's throat went dry, but he'd made his choice. He wouldn't lie. Yes, sir. Standard patrol route. And did you hear or see anything unusual? The question hung in the air between them. Thomas could lie, could claim he'd heard nothing, seen nothing, could protect himself. But looking into Reynolds' eyes, he knew the truth was already known. I heard voices, sir. I didn't intend to eavesdrop, but by the time I realized who was speaking, it was too late to announce my presence without making the situation worse. Reynolds nodded slowly. What did you hear? An argument. Between Her Royal Highness Princess Anne and Her Majesty Queen Camilla about memorial gardens and family matters. Personal matters. Did you report this to anyone? No, sir. Did you discuss it with anyone? Thomas hesitated. Another guard was present. James Hartley. He was conducting a security sweep. He heard it too. Reynolds' jaw tightened. James Hartley. Of course. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through something, then turned the screen to face Thomas. Have you seen this? It was a news alert. From one of the major tabloids, the headline read, Palace Insider, Explosive. Fight between Princess Anne and Queen Camilla over Diana Memorial. The article was marked as breaking news. Posted at 6:15 that morning. Less than an hour ago, Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. Sir? I know you didn't. Reynolds pulled the phone back. The article cites multiple anonymous palace sources. Staff members who apparently heard the argument. Details are vague enough to provide plausible deniability, but specific enough to be credible. He fixed Thomas with a hard stare. James Hartley requested an emergency personal day this morning. Cited a family matter. His phone location shows he's currently at a hotel in central London. The same hotel where the journalist who wrote this article has a room? Thomas closed his eyes. James had done it. Within hours of their conversation, he'd sold the story. Sir, I swear I had nothing to do with. I believe you. Reynolds stood up, walking to the window. Outside, dawn was breaking over the palace grounds, which is why you're going to do exactly as I say. The royal family is holding an emergency meeting in 1 hour. Senior staff have been asked to brief them on security protocols and potential breaches. He turned back to Thomas. You're going to be present. You're going to tell them exactly what happened. Everything you heard, everything you saw, and you're going to tell them about James Hartley? Thomas felt his world tilting. They'll want someone to blame, as Reynolds agreed. And better it be the actual culprit than you. But understand this, Brennan, your career here is on a knife's edge. How you handle yourself in that room will determine whether you continue to serve or whether you're escorted out by day's end." "I understand, sir." "Good. And Thomas?" Reynolds' expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, I believe you tried to do the right thing. That should count for something." But the way he said it made Thomas wonder if doing the right thing would be enough. At 8:30, Thomas found himself outside the private family sitting room. He'd walked these halls hundreds of times, but never like this. Never as a witness instead of a protector. Inside, he could hear voices, tense, urgent. The meeting had already started. A private secretary opened the door and gestured for Thomas and Reynolds to enter. The scene that greeted him was surreal. King Charles sat in the center of the room, his face drawn and exhausted. To his right, Queen Camilla sat with her hands folded, her expression carefully neutral. Princess Anne stood by the window, arms crossed, radiating controlled fury. Prince William was present too. His face was unreadable, but his jaw was tight. Next to him, several senior advisors and legal counsel filled out the room. Every eye turned to Thomas as he entered. "Your Majesty," Reynolds said, bowing. "This is Officer Thomas Brennan. He was on patrol last night and witnessed the conversation in question." Charles studied Thomas for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was weary. "Officer Brennan, I understand you were present during a private conversation between members of my family." "Yes, Your Majesty. I apologize for Charles held up a hand. You were doing your job. Walking your assigned route. No apology necessary for that." He paused. "What matters now is what happens next. The press has a story. They've twisted it, sensationalized it, and by noon it will be on every news channel in the world." He looked around the room, at Camilla, at Annette. "William, we need to know exactly what was said. Not the tabloid version. The truth. Because based on what's in this article," he gestured to a tablet on the table, "there are claims that will require official responses. And before we respond, I need to know what actually happened." Anne spoke from her position by the window. "The article says I accused Camilla of trying to erase Diana's memory, that I called her an outsider, that I said she could never replace Diana." She looked directly at Thomas. "Is that accurate?" Thomas felt every gaze in the room on him. This was it. The moment his entire career would be decided. He could soften it, could minimize the confrontation, could make it sound less hostile than it had been, but he'd already decided on the truth. "Yes, Your Royal Highness. That's largely accurate." The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. Charles closed his eyes. William's expression hardened. "And what did my wife say in response?" Charles asked quietly. Thomas swallowed hard. "She said she was trying to find space in a palace full of ghosts. That she wakes up every day knowing she could never replace Princess Diana? That she spent years enduring scrutiny and comparison." Camilla's hands trembled slightly. She pressed them together harder. "She also said," Thomas continued, keeping his voice level, "that she never tried to replace Princess Diana, that she was simply trying to breathe." Anne turned away from the window. Thomas saw her blink rapidly. Just once, Charles stood up slowly. He looked older than Thomas had ever seen him. Older and infinitely tired. "Thank you, Officer Brennan. Your honesty is appreciated." Thomas nodded, unsure if he should speak. "There's more," Reynolds interjected. "We believe we've identified the source of the leak." Another guard was present and has since contacted media outlets. Charles's expression hardened. "Handle it. I want legal action. Breach of confidentiality. Violation of security protocols. Everything." "Yes, Your Majesty." Charles looked around the room again. Everyone out, except Anne and Camilla. "We need to talk." "Really talk?" "No advisors, no staff, just family." The room emptied slowly. Thomas followed Reynolds out, acutely aware of the tension he was leaving behind. As the door closed, he heard Charles's voice, soft but firm. "Both of you. This ends now. But Thomas wondered if some things once spoken could ever really end, or if the damage was already too deep to heal. Thomas spent the next 3 hours in a conference room with legal counsel and palace communications staff. They went through his statement line by line, word by word, making him repeat everything, clarify everything, confirm everything. By the time they finished, it was nearly noon. "You're free to go," the lead attorney said finally. "But stay available. We may need additional testimony if this proceeds to court." Thomas nodded numbly and left. The palace felt different now. Staff members he'd known for years avoided eye contact. Whispered conversations stopped when he approached. He wasn't just a guard anymore. He was the witness. The man who'd heard too much. The complication in the staff canteen. He sat alone with a cup of coffee he didn't drink. His phone buzzed constantly. Messages from other guards, from former colleagues, even from journalists who'd somehow gotten his number. He ignored them all, except one. Text from an unknown number. "You made a choice. I made mine. Neither of us is wrong. We're just playing different games." J. James. Unrepentant. Unapologetic. Thomas deleted the message and put his phone face down on the table. "Mind if I sit?" He looked up to find Lady Margaret Ashworth standing there with her own cup of tea. The Queen Consort's private secretary? The woman who'd interrupted the argument last night? "Of course not, ma'am." She sat gracefully, studied him for a moment. "You're being talked about quite a bit today." "I imagine so. Some people are calling you loyal. Others are calling you naive." She sipped her tea. "For what it's worth, I think you're brave." "Ah." Thomas looked at her in surprise. "Brave? You told the truth when lying would have been easier. When silence would have been safer. That takes a certain kind of courage." "It doesn't feel like courage," Thomas admitted. "It feels like I ruined everything." "You didn't ruin anything, Officer Brennan. You simply witnessed a moment that was already broken." Margaret set down her cup. "Do you know why I came to find them last night? In that specific corridor, at that specific time?" Thomas shook his head, because I knew they were going to argue. Princess Anne had requested a meeting with the Queen Consort. Formally through official channels, but Camilla suggested somewhere private instead. Somewhere they could speak freely. She smiled sadly. They chose that corridor because there are no cameras there. No recording devices. No obvious security presence. They thought they could have an honest conversation without witnesses. And then, "I was there," Thomas said quietly.
Owie.
"And James Hartley. And apparently, several staff members passing through nearby corridors. The palace is never as private as we want it to be." She leaned forward slightly. "But here's what you should know. That conversation, it needed to happen. Not the way it happened, perhaps. Not with the leak in the scandal. But the issues they discussed, they've been festering for years. Decades, even. Someone needed to force them into the open. But now, it's all over the news," Thomas protested. "The family is fighting. The public is choosing sides. How does that help anything?" "Because secrets have power," Margaret said firmly. "As long as these tensions remained hidden, they could be ignored. Smoothed over, managed, but ignored problems don't disappear. They grow. They poison." She stood up, preparing to leave. What happened last night was messy and painful and very public. But sometimes, healing requires breaking open what's infected. After she left, Thomas sat with those words, turning them over in his mind. Around 1 in the afternoon, his phone rang. "Captain Reynolds." "Brennan. Family meeting is over. You need to hear this, sir. They've released a joint statement. It's going out to the press now." Reynolds read it to him over the phone. The statement acknowledged that there had been a private family, discussion about memorial projects and family foundations. It confirmed that Princess Anne and Queen Camilla had different perspectives on how to honor Princess Diana's legacy. It stated that all family members were committed to finding a path forward that respected both the past and the present. It was diplomatic, carefully worded, but it was also honest. "We're not denying the argument happened," Thomas said, surprised. "No, they're controlling the narrative instead." Reynolds paused. "The king made the decision. He said hiding it would only make it worse. That the family needed to acknowledge the truth and move forward with dignity. What about James? The leak? Legal proceedings have begun. He's been terminated immediately. And Thomas. Reynolds' voice softened. The king specifically requested that you be retained. He said anyone who values honesty over convenience is the kind of person he wants protecting his family. Thomas felt something loosen in his chest. Relief. Profound and unexpected. Thank you. Sir, don't thank me. Thank yourself for making the right choice. After hanging up, Thomas finally allowed himself to breathe. Really breathe? His career was intact. He'd survived. But more than that, he'd maintained his integrity. Later that evening, as his shift began, Thomas found himself back in the West Wing corridor. The same marble floors, the same portraits, the same silence, but different now. Forever changed by what had happened here, as he walked his patrol, he thought about everything Margaret had said, about secrets and healing, about the difference between privacy and dishonesty. He thought about Princess Anne's anger, about Queen Camilla's exhaustion, about King Charles trying to hold his family together while the world watched. They were royals, but they were also human, flawed, struggling, trying to navigate impossible situations with no perfect answers. And perhaps that was the real lesson from all. Of this, not that the royal family was broken, but that they were real. Thomas turned a corner and nearly ran into someone. He stepped back, startled. Princess Anne stood there, alone, just as she'd been last night. Your Royal Highness, Thomas said immediately, bowing. I apologize, I didn't see Officer Brennan, she interrupted. Her voice was calm, measured. I wanted to thank you. Thomas looked up in surprise. Ma'am? For telling the truth, even when it was difficult. Even when it would have been easier to lie or stay silent. She studied him for a moment. That kind of integrity is rare. In any circle, but especially here, I was just doing my duty, ma'am. No, Anne said firmly. Duty would have been following protocol, reporting what you heard immediately. What you did was harder than duty. You made a choice to be honest, even when it complicated everything. She glanced down the corridor, toward where the argument had happened. What you heard last night? Those were things that needed to be said. I don't regret saying them, but I do regret that you had to hear them, that anyone had to hear them. Family is complicated, ma'am, Thomas said quietly. Royal or not. Anne's lips quirked in something that might have been a smile. Indeed it is. She turned to leave, then paused. Officer Brennan, for what it's worth, I hope you continue to serve here. The palace needs people who understand the difference between loyalty and blind obedience. Then she walked away, her footsteps echoing on marble. Thomas stood there for a long moment, processing everything. The scandal would continue. The press would analyze and speculate. The public would debate. Family tensions would remain complicated, but something had shifted. Something fundamental. The royal family had been forced to confront truths they'd been avoiding. And whatever happened next, whether they found resolution or continued to struggle, at least they were facing it honestly. Thomas resumed his patrol. The corridor was quiet now, empty, but no longer holding secrets. And somehow, that felt like progress, even if it had taken a crisis to get there. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were clearing. And though Thomas didn't know it yet, his role in this story wasn't quite finished. Because 2 days later, something would happen that would test his integrity one final time, and the choice he made would define not just his career, but the kind of man he wanted to be. Princess Anne and Queen Camilla stood side by side, not friends perhaps, but no longer adversaries. They spoke briefly, and about preserving legacy. Camilla about honoring the past while embracing the present. Their words were careful but genuine. When they finished, they looked at each other. Just for a moment, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding, acknowledgement, the beginning of something like respect. Thomas, watched King Charles, observed his sister and wife, saw the relief in his face. The hope after the ceremony, as media gathered for the announcement, Thomas stood at his post. Professional, alert, silent. A journalist approached. Him, young, ambitious. She'd been one of many trying to reach him for days. "Officer Brennan, just a quick question about what you heard that night." "No comment," Thomas said firmly, but politely. "No, but you were there. You witnessed the whole argument." "Don't people deserve to know?" "People deserve to know that this family found a way forward," Thomas interrupted. "That's the story that matters now." The journalist opened her mouth to argue, but Thomas had already turned away. Back to his post. Back to his duty. As the ceremony concluded and the family departed, Princess Anne paused near Thomas's position. "Thank you, Officer Brennan," she said quietly, "for your discretion. And your presence here today, it's an honor, Your Royal Highness." She nodded once, then followed her family back toward the palace. Thomas remained at his post until the garden emptied. Until only he and the flowers remained, he thought about everything that had happened. The argument, the leak, the scandal, the resolution. All of it connected by one thread, the choice to face truth rather than hide from it. James Hartley had chosen to exploit the truth, to profit from pain. And he'd lost everything for it. Thomas had chosen to honor the truth, even when it was difficult, even when it would have been easier to lie, and in doing so, he'd kept his integrity intact. He'd learned something important in these past few days, something that would stay with him for the rest of his career. Loyalty didn't mean protecting people from consequences. It meant standing beside them through those consequences. It meant being honest when honesty mattered most. The royal family would continue to face challenges. The press would continue to scrutinize. Family tensions would rise and fall like tides, but Thomas had played his small part in helping them navigate this particular crisis with dignity, and that, he realized, was all any Gardeny person could really hope to do. Make the right choice when it mattered. Stand firm when others wavered. Tell the truth, even when silence would be easier. As Thomas left the garden and returned to his duties, he felt something he hadn't felt in days. Peace. He'd been tested. He'd made his choice, and he could live with the consequences. That evening, as his shift ended, Thomas paused in the West Wing corridor one final time. The place where everything had begun, where two women had spoken painful truths to each other in the shadows. The corridor was quiet now. Just marble and portraits and silence, but it felt different. Lighter somehow. As if the honesty that had passed through here had cleansed something, released something that needed to be free. Thomas smiled slightly and continued walking. Behind him, the corridor remained empty. The secrets it had held were no longer buried, and the people who'd confronted those secrets, royal and common alike, were finding their way forward, imperfectly, honestly, together, which was all anyone could really ask for in the palace, or anywhere else. The story that had gripped Thomas's life for these past few days was over, but the lessons would remain. The integrity he'd maintained would guide him through countless future moments of choice, and years later, when he told his grandchildren about his time serving the royal family, he would remember this week not as a scandal or a crisis, but as the time he learned that doing the right thing, even when it was hard, was always worth it, even for a simple guard walking empty corridors in a palace full of ghosts. Because in the end, integrity isn't about the grand gestures or the public moments. It's about the choices we make when no one's watching, the truths we tell when lying would be easier, the stand we take when everyone else sits down. And Thomas Brennan, palace guard, had made his stand, and it had mattered more than he would ever fully know.